Hi, good morning. This is Rachel Galarraga of the Strategic Growth Council TCC program staff, and welcome everyone this morning, stakeholders, state agency partners, interested applicants to the Transformative Climate Communities Implementation Grants application. And we're coming to you from Sacramento, from the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. With me today, I have my colleagues, Saharnaz Mirzad, TCC Program Manager from the Strategic Growth Council, Julian Nagel from SGC, TCC Program Staff, and we also have our colleagues at the Department of Conservation. We have Sophie Young, TCC Program Staff, Elizabeth Hessam, and Elena Davert with us today. So with that, what we plan to go over with you this morning, we plan to go over just briefly about the TCC program and the two grants that we offer. We will go over the implementation grants. And so if you're joining us today, hopefully it's for the implementation grants or at least more information on it. We will also be having a webinar on our planning grants tomorrow at 10 a.m. So if you're interested in that, please sign up on the SGC website to register. Let's see, we'll be going over the application components, application process, timeline, and resources. And at the end, we will have an opportunity for questions. And so we do ask, I believe you are all muted at this time, so we ask that you hold off on your questions until the end of the presentation. We will have, you'll be able to either put in questions in a chat box, or I think we have capability if you want to verbalize your questions towards the end. So just some background on the program. It was established in 2016 per AB 2722, and it was intended to fund neighborhood-level transformative climate community plans that include multiple coordinated greenhouse gas emission reductions projects that provide local economic, environmental, and health benefits to disadvantaged communities. So we had already gone through one round of TCC. We made our awards for both implementation and planning grants last January. This year, we are also awarding implementation grants and planning grants. We'll be awarding 2 grants for implementation. This year will be a statewide competition. So everyone's on equal footing. It'll be what's different from last year is it'll be a 5-year grant term as opposed to a 3 years last year. For planning grants, we have $800,000 available from Prop 84 funds, and the planning grants are intended to provide additional capacity to eligible TCC potential TCC applicants for the implementation grants to get them ready to prepare implementation grant application in the future. We will be awarding 4 planning grants, and it will be a statewide competition, and the grant term will also be 1 year. So this is specific to implementation grants. Currently, the TCC program has been allocated $46 million. So under that, we will be issuing 2 grants, or awarding 2 grants. We have potential for additional funding, and that would be to increase the amount for larger awards for those 2 grant awardees. So we are requesting that applicants develop 2 scenarios at this time. One scenario for a suite of projects for $23 million, and another one for $33 million. And we are hoping that in the next few weeks, soon in September, that we will know whether or not we have the additional funding. So at that time, when we have the direction from our council, we will actually instruct all of our applicants to budget for $33 million. And that approval will actually be at the September SGC Council meeting. So to go over implementation grants, just in general, these are some applicant and project area eligibility. So eligible applicants, not limited to community-based organizations, local governments, nonprofit organizations, philanthropic organizations and foundations, faith-based organizations, coalitions or association of nonprofit organizations, community development finance institutions, community development corporations, joint power authorities, and or tribal governments. So this listing is in the TCC guidelines. Our applicants must develop a collaborative stakeholder structure comprised of a lead applicant, co-applicants, and also if stakeholders could be included in that structure. We do require that for the applications that there be a support and participation of a public agency at a minimum. And the public agency does not have to be the lead applicant. That's not required, but they do need to be one of the co-applicants. We have requirements for organizational capacity and proposal readiness, project area requirements, consistency with local land use plans and transportation plans, and high-speed rail connectivity. And this is only applicable to cities along the initial operating route from Silicon Valley to the Central Valley line. And we'll go into detail a little bit about each of these points. So for project area requirements, these are actually the same as last year, but it must be the project area must be a contiguous area, so it can't be in various places within the city. Must be approximately 5 square miles. We've had some that were a little more concentrated than that, but generally we're looking at a neighborhood level that will impact kind of a targeted area. It must be within a single city's jurisdictional boundary. And a requirement is that it must be made up of priority populations. At least 51% of the project area must be classified as top 5% of Calvin-Virus Green census tracts. The remainder may be either designated as low income AB 1550 census tracts or classified as a top 25% Calvin-Virus Green census tract. And just to hit again that they must be consistent with state, regional, and local plans for that area. So for high-speed rail connectivity, like I mentioned, this is only a requirement for the Silicon Valley to Central Valley line. So it only applies to proposals that may come out of Bakersfield, Fresno, Hanford, Madera, and Merced. So it must benefit the application must demonstrate that it benefits the surrounding neighborhood and the HSR station area. Must demonstrate multimodal connectivity to the station, and also ensure affordable and mixed income housing near the station. For applicant requirements, for the collaborative stakeholder structure, we require that for everyone who signs on to be on the applicant team, that they also have a signed memorandum of understanding. We have specific requirements on, at a minimum, what should be included in that MOU, and those are listed in the guidelines. We'll have some additional guidance on that. That will be in either resource documents and also technical assistance that we will be providing to all interested applicants at no cost. So, like I mentioned before, support of a public agency and capacity to implement. So we will be looking at documentation that demonstrates management ability to manage a large grant, such as that could, be about $33 million, and whether or not these organizations have financial capacity. For readiness, we do require that there be a minimum of 3 proposed projects within your proposal. So it could be a combination of things. It could be housing. It could be multiple active transportation projects. It could be low-income weatherization, energy efficiency, various projects that are eligible under the Transformative Climate Communities. And so of these 3, they must meet full readiness requirements at the time of application, and they must the requested funds must comprise 50% of the total. So if you have at a minimum these 3 projects, then 50%. These 3 projects must equate to the 50%. So if it was $33 million, half of that would have to be ready at a very minimum. So, and also of these 3 projects, they must be quantifiable. You must be able to quantify greenhouse gas emissions using the CARB-approved quantification methodology. And if there are more than 3 projects, which we've had in our previous round 1, there were definitely more than 3 projects, the remaining projects must be ready within the first year of the grant term. Next, we're going to go over, these are transformative requirements of our program. Track and monitor GHG emission reductions and benefits and indicators. Avoid displacement of existing households and small businesses. Community engagement, there's a leverage funding requirement. Climate adaptation, resiliency, and workforce and economic development. And we will go over each of those briefly. So for tracking and monitoring, we have indicator tracking as a requirement. We must track and document the GHG reductions with the project or the suite of projects. Must track the co-benefits associated with those investments, and also estimating the GHG reductions. So there's a 2-step process. During the application phase, our applicants will do an initial estimate during the application prior to the submittal with the technical assistance provider. So you will receive direct assistance on your proposed suite of projects to kind of estimate and gauge, well, you have a suite of projects, but what type of impact on a GHG reduction would that have? And that can kind of help you gauge to see what, whether or not you as a team, kind of hit where you envision it being. And then afterwards, after your application is submitted, the final quantification methodology will be submitted, will be run after the application is submitted. Our next requirement is the displacement avoidance plan, describing the vulnerability of households and businesses within the project area. We just want to ensure that policies and plans and that there will be minimal disruption to the existing population in that project area. Describing policies, plans, and ordinances. Identifying additional policies that you'd like to implement during the TCC implementation to ensure displacement avoidance, and provide a relocation plan pursuant to relocation law if necessary, depending on what type of activities are proposed for your project area. For community engagement, this is probably a very important aspect of the TCC program, if not the most. You must describe your community engagement methods during the proposal development, and we really encourage also pre-proposal development, what type leading up to historically, how community groups or various projects or proposals came together. Develop a community engagement plan for implementation. Describe methods of how you would facilitate engagement at the project level. So, how you would deploy, doing more low-income weatherization in various residences within your project area, as an example. And in the guidelines, there is criteria for eligible costs for community engagement. So. For leverage funding, this has not changed from last year. It must equal at least 50% of requested grant funds, so half of the $33 million must be committed at the time of application. So there's a listing here of eligible sources. There's some in the guidelines, and you can also work with your technical assistance provider to make sure that you have the right sources and documentation as part of your application process. Next is climate adaptation and resiliency. So as part of this, we're making investments into our disadvantaged communities throughout the state, and we want to ensure that that the funding, goes towards at least identifying and potentially finding ways to mitigate impacts to vulnerable communities. So as part of the application, identifying the climate change risks for the project area, there is guidance in the guidelines about what resources are available to kind of identify those risks, and also working with the technical assistance about providers, and also describing how either holistically or at a project level, how they would reduce risk and promote resiliency for the community. Workforce and economic development. We do require a creation of a workforce and economic development plan. It should provide workforce development and education training programs or opportunities with an emphasis on career pathways for residents of the project area, and explain how the TCC investment will create high-quality jobs for the community. So here's an overview of the TCC framework. So generally it starts with our 3 program objectives: greenhouse gas reduction, and public health and environmental benefits, economic opportunity, and shared prosperity. So that's kind of our primary program objectives. So as part of your proposal, we're asking applicants to create a unique vision to their community that ties in how they would do, how their proposal would help either, meet the needs of the community, as well as hitting on the program objectives, 3 program objectives. So once you have your vision statement, you do select a minimum of 3 strategies, and we'll go over that in detail in the next few slides. Minimum of 3 strategies of how those would be implemented. And then actually physically implementing, you select your suite of projects associated to the strategies. And then later, if your proposal is awarded, indicators would be, there would be tracking of indicators to show progress as you implement the projects during the implementation, and also at completion of the grant. So like I mentioned, there are strategies to select from. These are TCC strategies. There are 8. They're listed here. We've streamlined them more this year, not to tie to other existing CCI programs, to make them more in alignment with the TCC program. So there's the 8 there. So projects and fundable elements. So for each of the projects that you propose under each of the strategies, or at least 3 strategies, let's see, they're organized by strategy. Each of the projects are organized by strategy in Appendix D. So the Appendix D of the TCC guidelines is a very important document for you to review and to kind of understand. It's very detailed, but I think once you understand the structure, you'll be able to find what would be applicable for your proposal. So applicants must develop projects that include quantifiable elements. So that's a requirement because these are climate investment funds. So, and those are, the quantifiable elements are indicated by an asterisk in Appendix D, and each of those that are identified result in GHG emission reductions that can be quantified using a approved quantification methodology from CARB. And of those, a minimum of 3 quantifiable projects must be ready at the time of application and total at least 50% or more of the funding request. So there are a lot of specific requirements, and I think, you know, that's why we encourage you to really understand and read the guidelines, and then work with your TA provider, just to make sure that each of the things, although you've got your suite of projects, that it still meets each of the requirements. So, and projects this year that's different, that we also are going to provide funding for non-quantifiable elements. So that's why there's a minimum of 50%, but we will fund non-quantifiable elements as well, as long as they are listed in Appendix D. So, so for projects and fundable elements, they could include elements from multiple categories within the same strategy, and we'll have a demonstration of that later in the next few slides. Projects cannot include elements from multiple strategies, so it's really focused. How are you going to implement? How are you going to implement that strategy? Projects that include quantifiable elements are referred to as quantifiable projects. So, and elements not listed in Appendix D must be paid for with leverage funding. So here's a demonstration of just a strategy, for example, that's in Appendix D. This is for transit access and mobility. And under this, we have the active transportation project. And so under here, we have eligible categories: construction of a new bike path or lane must be class 1, 2, or 4. So in this example, we said we wanted to select new or expanded context-sensitive bike lanes. So, and let's say as part of that project, okay, so that particular project is associated with that strategy. So select the strategy based on the project that you want to implement. Next, that's the associated element is active transportation. And to determine whether or not it's quantifiable, for these two here, they're actually coupled together, I believe, in this example for one project. So both of these, the newer expanded bike paths or lanes, has an asterisk here. And it looks like this project also includes new walkways, and that has an asterisk too. So that both of these together would count as a quantifiable project. So let's say your project actually has more than just these two. Let's say you want to include a street crossing as well, including accessible pedestrian signals. That, for instance, is not quantifiable. So, but that doesn't mean the project itself would be quantifiable because you have two elements that are. So if you bundle those together, that project as a whole would be quantifiable. In this case, the street crossing would be fundable. It's just non-quantifiable. But that's new for this year, so we do want to, we recognize there's importance of other elements that should be included to complement the quantifiable elements. So next, for readiness of each of the projects, so they, to be 100% ready, and we're saying at least a minimum of 3, they have to meet all CEQA requirements. So here's a listing here, either demonstrating that it is CEQA compliant, or in the review process that it has been completed, and that includes any, at the time the notice of determination is issued, that any the time period for a challenge, a legal challenge, has passed. So that it's completely ready. It's almost pretty much shovel ready. And for projects that do not meet environmental review requirements, then they must be ready within the first year of the grant term. And also to note that affordable housing projects must meet, this is the only project that must meet all CEQA requirements at the time of application. So if you're proposing affordable housing, that must be part of your minimum of 3 projects ready. Other readiness requirements, you must have site control. You must obtain all permits that were required to implement that project. And there are additional requirements too, like maps, designs, operation and maintenance plans, and though a listing, at a minimum, a listing of those are in project-specific forms that are in each of the applications. So these are just characteristics of quantifiable versus non-quantifiable. So like we said, it has to be quantifiable. It's indicated by an asterisk in Appendix D. Your project bundled, like we demonstrated in that table, that it could be quantifiable if it's coupled with another one that's non-quantifiable. That project as a whole would be quantifiable. Also, that project would all in turn be counted towards your greenhouse gas score as part of the scoring process. And there's a listing of non-quantifiable. They are eligible for TCC funding, but they just don't meet certain minimum requirements. So, here's a listing of ineligible projects. Acquisition through eminent domain, projects that can't demonstrate site control, and projects that do not provide GHG reduction, public health, environmental, economic benefits to the project area through the grant term. So because these don't align with our program objectives. However, it's possible for that last bullet point, it could be part of your leverage funding scenario. So here's just some guidance on eligible costs. So we've made it more clear this year that indirect and overhead will count for up to 10%. Community engagement, we'll fund up to 8%, but we do require a range somewhere between 5% of requested grant funds. Workforce development will fund up to 5%. And this year, we will fund direct costs associated with pre-development for some of those that are not ready yet. So up to 5% of requested funds. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth Hessam from the Department of Conservation to begin our review on application components.
Thank you, Rachel. Just launching right into it, in regards to the instructions, before beginning work, applicants should review the application instructions thoroughly. These instructions are available to download from the TCC resources webpage, and this is also where the applicants should download the application package. The general format and content of the application materials this year are similar to last year's. but we have tried to streamline it more for applicants. For starting the application, applicants need to start and submit an application within FAST, and this is also known as the Financial Assistance Application Submittal Tool. For FAST, only the lead applicant will be submitting an application in FAST, and it will be basically used for the applicant to provide identifying information for the application, answering narrative questions, and uploading the application zip file. Additional information on FAST is provided within the application instructions.
So the application package that you downloaded should look like this when you open it up, and we ask that you use this file structure to organize all of your application materials. We will walk through that file structure right now. As Rachel mentioned, we first ask that you develop 2 proposal scenarios for a $23 or $33 million grant award until further notice on the final amount. But in the meantime, please make 2 copies of the application package and develop those proposals. So the first folder in the application package is the threshold uploads folder, and the requirements for all of these documents is described in the instructions. Please upload these documents to the appropriate folders that we have provided here. And please use the naming convention that is provided in the instructions for all application files. The second folder in the application package is for the transformative plans. And the transformative plans folder has 4 different folders for the plans. Each one has a set of questions and a workbook that need to be filled out for each plan. The only exception is the Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Plan, which only requires questions and not a workbook. Once complete, please upload these documents to this folder. The third folder in the application package is for all of the fundable projects. So the project materials are organized by strategy. You'll see them listed here. These are as they appear in Appendix D in the guidelines. Each strategy folder has a template project folder, which includes all of the application materials that need to be filled out by a project lead, or what we call the lead entity of a project. So the lead entity will fill out all of the applicable application materials in that folder and rename the folder and the files according to the naming convention before sending it back to the lead applicant. Each template project folder contains these documents. There are 3 documents and 2 folders. All of the application materials need to be filled out, with the exception of the quantification documentation, which is not required for non-quantifiable projects. Going back to the projects folder, you'll see under the list of strategies that there is another folder for leverage-only projects. The leverage-only projects also has its own set of questions and a workbook that need to be filled out for every leverage-funded project that is submitted. Once the lead entity receives all of the project folders from, once the lead applicant receives all of the project folders from the lead entities, please file them under the appropriate strategy folders and make sure that they are clearly named. And we ask you to then delete the strategy folders that are not included in your proposal.
Another component of the application are the project-specific questions. These questions are in fillable PDFs, and they can be found within the project folders in the zip file. The PDFs must be completed for all transformative plans, fundable projects, and leverage-funded projects. These must be filled out completely, and note that there are character limits specified for each question. Within the fillable PDFs, there is a section where applicants must describe and provide details on the project readiness. Shown in the slide is an example of a table that applicants will need to complete. For readiness, applicants must provide supporting documentation to demonstrate the project's feasibility, quality, and compliance. And these documents must be uploaded within the readiness documentation folder within the project folder in the zip file. Applicants will be providing a number of readiness details and must also answer narrative questions describing the readiness. Also within the fillable PDFs, there are tables indicating the input data applicants must provide in order to calculate a greenhouse gas emission reduction estimate for the project. These calculations will be done using the California Air Resources Board quantification methodology for TCC. And shown in the slide is an example table showing the data inputs to be collected for an urban green project. There will be required documentation that has to be provided as a part of the greenhouse gas emission reduction calculation as well. And shown in the slide is an example of required documentation for an urban green project. The data inputs and required documentation described within the fillable PDFs only apply to quantifiable projects and do not apply to non-quantifiable projects. Documentation must be uploaded into the quantification documentation folder, also within the project folder in the zip file. As mentioned, this data will be used for the TCC quantification methodology calculation, so applicants may want to refer to the TCC QM. Applicants will also be working with technical assistance providers when calculating the GHG reductions and may need to provide additional documentation to the TA providers.
So the final component of the application will be the application workbooks. And there are 4 types of workbook templates that are saved in the application file. There's a summary workbook, a transformative plan workbook, project workbook, and leverage workbook. And as touched on earlier, these materials have already been saved into the appropriate template folder, so you don't need to complete them unless it's in the folder that you're working on. Some general instructions for all workbooks. Just make sure you read the instructions before beginning work. There's a lot of detail in the instructions PDF for how to fill out each appropriate workbook. And make sure that all identifying information matches across the materials uploaded in FAST, any fillable PDFs, and related workbooks. So some examples of that would be lead applicant name, proposal name, city, the project number, and project name. Also, make sure not to edit any cells in gray, green, or red. These have formulas that shouldn't be altered. You'll also notice there are some check cells that will help indicate if any formulas aren't adding up correctly. They'll appear as green if everything is good to go, and they'll highlight as red if there are any errors. And you can also refer to the character count cells, which will help when you're filling out fields with character limits. If you need to add any rows to any tables, you have 2 options. You can either begin typing directly below the table, and Excel will automatically turn that into a row within the table. You can also drag and drop the little green triangle on the bottom right-hand corner of each table to add rows. And below there are a couple examples. One is a work plan table and a budget table. If you have any issues with this, you can always contact the TA provider. For some more specific instructions, for the project, plan, and leverage workbooks, they all have pretty similar structures and content. These will be filled out by the lead entity for every fundable project, transformative plan, or leverage project. You can see below where those templates are stored. And again, you only need to fill them out if it's in the appropriate folder that you're working on. The first tab in all these workbooks is a work plan tab. This is pretty straightforward. You can adjust the work plan tabs as needed. You can add and delete additional task tabs depending on how many tasks you have, and you can also add or delete the number of subtasks. These workbooks also have a budget tab. For each line item in your budget, you'll be able to enter a task number, select a cost category from the drop-down menu, enter a brief description, and fill out cost per unit and number of units. Some things to note, the task number should correspond with the tasks outlined in the work plan tab. The total project cost column that is highlighted in gray will automatically calculate based on the cost per unit and number of units. And here, if you have any subcontractors or other lump sums, you can leave that unit number as 1. There's an example at the bottom of the page there. And once the total project cost is automatically calculated, you'll use the rows to the right to distribute that cost between requested grant funds and leverage funds. So again, the bottom example there, you have a landscape architect that's going to be paid for partially with grant funds, partially with leverage funds, and the check column on the far right-hand side will make sure that grant funds plus leverage funds equals the total project cost. If you need to add a leverage column to any of these budget tables, please use the instructions on this slide. Right-click on that leverage X column and insert columns to the left. This will just make sure that the equations calculate properly. Another thing to note is that the lead applicants will be using information from the budget tabs in these workbooks to complete their summary workbook, which we'll get to in a moment. So lead applicants will be referring to that calculated totals row. It's highlighted in orange. And they can also find the subtotals for individual cost categories by hitting that little gray box in the cost category column and sorting for either pre-development costs, project costs, or indirect costs. And then those calculated totals will recalculate. So moving on to the summary workbook, this will be completed by the lead applicant only. There's only one of them. The first tab is the applicant summary. So this should include all the co-applicants included in the MOU and the TCC proposal. We've provided room for 9 co-applicants, but you can add as many spaces as needed. So you can just copy and paste the tables on the applicant summary tab if you need more of them. The next tab is a proposal summary. This is a large table that will list all transformative plans, fundable projects, and leverage projects. This will serve as an at-a-glance summary for the proposal as a whole. So we've also provided a brief space on the right-hand side for a brief description of 150 characters for each project. Again, the lead applicant will complete this table using information from the other project, plan, and leverage workbooks. So they'll provide a breakdown of how much each project will require of requested grant funds and total leverage. And you can delete any unused rows here. We've provided room for many more projects than you'll probably need. The next tab is the requested grant funds tab. This will be for grant funded elements only. So you won't include any leverage projects or the displacement avoidance plan on this page. This will be used to provide a more detailed breakdown of each cost category for each project. And this tab will also be used to double check that the applicants are not exceeding any of the category caps established in the guidelines, and also make sure that they'll meet certain quantifiable and readiness thresholds. So as an example here, you can see that this applicant has over budgeted for workforce development. So that cell has highlighted as red, and they are also not meeting the threshold for quantifiable and complete projects. So that cell is also highlighted in red. For all the other thresholds that they're good to go on, the cells are green. And for reference, we've also included the percentage caps from the guidelines in the row, a couple rows above. So you can just see that as you're filling out this sheet. And the last tab is the Leverage Funding Sources tab. It's a summary of all leverage funding sources and supporting documentation. So any documents that are mentioned here in the far right-hand column should also be uploaded in the threshold uploads folder. And finally, there's an application checklist. This is the last page in the instructions PDF. You can use this to make sure that your application is complete. You should also double check that all the naming conventions are correct. Once your folder is all put together, you can zip the application package all together and upload it into FAST in the Attachments tab before submitting your application. And just a reminder that you should budget sufficient time before the application deadline in case there are any technical difficulties getting things to work in FAST.
Thank you, Elizabeth, Sophie, and Elena. I know for you joining us remotely, that was a lot of information. I just wanted to let you know that the presentation will be available on the TCC website. So we're going to go briefly over the application process. Like we mentioned before, technical assistance is actually required for all applicants, and it's at no cost. And some of the services provided includes reviewing some of your narrative responses, application coordination, taking a look at your fiscal and budget information, giving you feedback and support on how your projects are integrated and how that it appears in the proposal, and assessment of project readiness. And also, I'd like to add as well, greenhouse gas emission quantification. The deadline, it's coming up this Tuesday. The deadline to complete interest in receiving technical assistance and actually being an applicant is this Tuesday, September 4th. So please make note of that date if you haven't submitted the survey already. We'll have a link at the end of this presentation for all that information, and it is on the SGC website. So just a little bit on FAST, some information. The applications must be submitted by through the FAST system and due by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, October 30th. So you need to upload that zip file by then. Here's a link to the FAST website, as well as there is currently a pre-recorded webinar on how to use the system on the SGC website. So please take a look at that if you're not familiar with FAST, and information on how to receive technical assistance on the FAST system from their help desk. So phone number and email. What happens after you submit? Well, on October 30th, well, here the TCC program staff will be doing a completeness check on your application. If we find during the review that we believe there's some missing information in your application, you'll be notified by one of the program staff. Upon notification, the applicant will have two business days to respond to the request or to provide the information. If not, the application will be could be reviewed as is, or if non-responsive, let's see, could in some cases, if the applicant is non-responsive, let's say we try to contact you by phone or email and we don't hear back, and it's a critical piece and is a minimum requirement, the application may be deemed incomplete. So just on GHG emission calculations, applicants must collect and provide inputs. As my colleagues in the Department of Conservation showed, there was some inputs for various projects on there. So you would coordinate with the TA provider to make sure that and provide that information to them. We'll consult with each of the applicant teams, as we mentioned, to provide an initial estimate of the reductions, and then they will do a final analysis after the application is submitted. Just a little bit on scoring criteria. These are general scores. It's much more detailed in the guidelines of how each of the criteria is further broken out. So transformative plan, transformative requirements, and capacity to implement, each 30 points each, and then 10 points for project assessment. So for a total of 100%. So timeline, we issued our NOFA, our call for projects, on August 15th. Today we are doing our webinar for implementation grants. The survey, as I mentioned, to submit your interest in receiving technical assistance is September 4th, so the day after Labor Day. Your applications must be uploaded to FAST by October 30th at 5 p.m. We will, as part of the implementation grants, we will be requiring to do site visits, so anticipate those are happening in late November. And then in early December, we'll release recommended awards by the council. And then at the December 20th meeting, the SGC will approve the 2 awards. So here's just a listing, kind of a cheat sheet on various resources, the guideline, notice of funding availability, instructions and application package, a link to the pre-recorded webinar on YouTube, how to get technical assistance, just general, if you need to reach out to the TCC program, there's the general inbox, there's a phone number. If you need technical assistance with a fast system, there's information there. And also, a big note, like we mentioned, we'll get information on what the award amounts will be. So please sign up for email updates if you haven't already. So if we know for sure that we're going to get additional funding, we want to reach out to all of our applicants and stakeholders. So there's the deadline. I think we could emphasize that. And then, let's see. And then questions. Here's our email and telephone number. So at this time, this presentation will be available online. We'll post it on our website. But at this time, we will take questions either through the chat box, or if you want to raise your hand, and we can call out to each of you. So at this time, I didn't see any questions in the, oh, there's one. Cool. So far, it looks like we have one question in the inbox there. The question is, let's see, how do you handle competing application from the same areas? Do you ever recommend that they work together? Yes, we do recommend you work together. I think it depends on what your proposal, what you're trying to achieve, and actually the project area. So, for instance, if it's within one city, it may be on different parts of the city. So, in that case, you might not be able to come up with a contiguous project area. I think we would recommend coming together just for a resource point of view, and actually it may make your proposal stronger if you have a larger suite and show more integration. So let's see. I think we have a question. I'll get to that one later. So that was a question from Robert. LA Trees, LA City.
It says it is.
Is
a city less than 5 square miles eligible?
As a city less, yes, I believe it would be.
I think the language in the guidelines says no more than approximately 5 square miles. So yeah, it just can't be greater than.
Yes, I think we just wanted to show like the area of potential impact. So, but definitely can be less. We've had ones that were that were awarded over 2 square miles. So we've had that range there, maybe 2 square miles, between 2.5 to 5 square miles. Let's see. Inclusive housing projects. This is from Alan. Inclusive housing projects must meet all SEQA requirements at the time of application, but can they be funded if they are not fully ready? Alan, the answer is actually no, they can't, but they could be considered as leverage funded projects. So you could include it in your suite of projects, but it just wouldn't be TCC eligible for funding. So, let's see. And then Leslie has a question. Can you please say more about not using more than one strategy for a project? For example, if we're including a new library for a proposal that had planned on infusing the project with several strategies, is that possible? I think.
So my understanding is that you can have a project that includes elements from more than one strategy, but we still need them broken out for quantification purposes. So if you have a project that maybe has elements from urban greening and active transportation and something else, you still will need to fill out the questions for the active transportation portion and the questions for the urban greening portion and the quantification for each of those portions. And that's just due to the way that our quantification methodology is broken out.
Thanks, Elena. The next, let's see, what's that? I think those are all the questions. Let's just see if we have any other hands raised that we didn't answer. So Robert, you had your hand raised, but I think we answered your question. Let's see if there's anybody else. Okay, it looks like we don't have any other hands raised or any other questions at this time. And I think we're almost at our limit here. But again, please, if you know, based on this information, take time to absorb it. We'll post the presentation tomorrow, probably following the planning grant webinar. So if you come up with more questions, please feel free to reach out to us at the TCC program at the contact information provided. Also, you'll have an opportunity if you decide to go forward with an application. You will be assigned an actual TA provider to work with you one-on-one, and they'll set up like an initial kickoff and all types of things to get you on track to meeting the various requirements. So if there are no others at this time, we'll conclude. We appreciate you taking this time through half of the noon hour, and we look forward to working with you all. Thank you.